Hi. Good afternoon, everybody. We'd like to get started. We have a meaty, juicy conversation planned for lunch today. And we want to make sure that we have enough time for folks to also engage in some conversations at your table, some individual reflection, and then, of course, asking questions of the folks up here on stage. So my name is Raquel Guitierrez. I work with Vitalyst Health Foundation. It's a medium-sized health foundation in Phoenix, Arizona, and we focus on supporting organizations and individuals who are working to address root causes that keep communities from being healthy. And I want to just preface a little bit about what we're going to do in the next hour and a half, and that is yesterday's plenary, raised the veil about driving forces and challenges for funders and residents to build community power as a form of resiliency. And I have to say, I was really moved by that conversation and the vulnerability that the folks up on stage shared with us. That was very unusual, I think, for a funders gathering. And I really want to thank you for that. The other is that our plenary today is going to shed light on how funders and folks who are working in the community, residents, are shifting their approaches. So one thing I've mentioned is that the questions we're going to be asking today on stage of the panelists are actually things that can be answered by any person. It can be answered by a funder, it can be answered by a community-based organization representative, and it also can be answered by a resident. Like yesterday, we're going to hear about challenges and insights, both personal and organizational, that inform how we're moving forward to have community engagement move to community-led approaches. This conversation is based fundamentally on 4 premises. The first one is that building the resident power is the greatest long-term resource for community resiliency, something we're working by. The other is solutions are better fit and are more sustainable when they are identified and led by local residents. Good news for us in philanthropy, there's actually a role for us. That's another premise we're working by. And then the last premise is that funders, residents, and those organizations who help funders build relationships with residents in the community must courageously and honestly address the current power dynamics that are in place. And I would just really add, we have to reimagine together what a transformed relationship can look like. And that means reimagining together and not individually. So with that in mind, we're going to spend about 50 to 60 minutes in the conversation and then 30 minutes in dialogue at the tables and asking questions. So I'm going to just start by asking folks up here to introduce themselves and then share what motivated this shift in your approach.
Great. Well, thank you, Raquel. My name is Angela Brown of the Hyams Foundation based in Boston, Mass., and I'll talk a little bit about our new mission statement in a moment. I'm joined by Hyams grantee, City Life Vida Urbana Executive Director Lisa Owens. One of the innovations of our panel format here, if you want to call it that, is that it's a funder community partner pairing. So just trying it out on you guys. So for Hyams, we have made a shift recently. If you'd asked us 7 or 8 years ago what our funding strategies and approach really was at that time, I would have, I've been sort of summarizing it as we were a bit of a community empowerment funder. We were comfortable in already funding community organizing, grassroots leadership development, and institutional policy change. And as well, we were doing things like supporting nonprofits who were choosing to take on market forces and acquire and build affordable housing on land in communities that really needed that resource and helping them with their practice. Or we were also supporting youth groups to help with education and strategies, positive youth development strategies, around re-engaging pushed out youth who traditional education didn't work for them, but we could show through innovative practice something else is possible. But really a lot of multiple strategies, the program and systemic change was on the agenda. Fast forward, we went into a strategic plan process. Yeah, that terminology, kind of traditional funder, strategic planning. Anyway, we did do strategic planning and embraced a process for a good year and a half. 2014, 2015, early part of 2015. Really had a number of engagements both with community, with our board, as a staff, really facilitated conversations, and really delved into some of the things that we've been involved with, what was working, where did we see excitement and results that really sparked our imagination. And I would say that seeing the positive policy change, we had a conversation about people-centered policy and imagining that in the session that I just went to, seeing some actual examples and seeing the beautiful long-term commitment of communities towards advancing those policy change, both at the city, municipal level, and statewide policy, really caught fire in our imaginations. So some examples of those endeavors were things like ending the use of the Corey record, this whole ban the box notion. Massachusetts hadn't passed legislation about that, and so through grassroots community organizing, legislation was passed to make it possible that, yes, you've been swept up into incarceration, but do you have to pay for that forever in terms of searching for jobs or housing? So banning the use of the box on application forms. That was done legislatively, all through grassroots community power, and some housing preservation legislation. These are examples. So because of the seeing the voice of community and the importance of community in doing those things, we asked ourselves, what about embracing this more fully? And so I'm happy to say, fast forward out of this strategic plan process, which a lot of pieces went into that, we have a new mission statement. And it is that the Hyams Foundation is advancing economic, social, and racial justice and power in the cities of Boston and Chelsea. And we want it to be overt, we want it to be explicit. It really says that we have a political analysis about what it's going to take to drive equitable outcomes and the need for equity analysis in everything that philanthropy, government, community, all of us are doing. I'm so excited now to turn to Lisa in a quick minute to kind of complement that story, but super quick, some of the meaning of this strategy and this mission that we've now laid out is that 90% of our funding is going to community organizing, policy advocacy, and institutional change, and grassroots leadership development, 90% of it. A lot of the funding that we do with the grassroots leadership development, in particular, we put out in the form of general operating support. That's right. Is Gen Ops, and particularly two-year grants. We try to do a lot of that. But one piece that we were intrigued by and was very interesting is that we kind of made an additive structure in the way that we're doing our funding. So not only supporting a base building group such as City Life Vida Urbana or Alternatives for Community and Environment and such, but that we also wanted to resource the policy coalitions and alliances that were beginning to evolve as collective spaces of some of these groups. And so unlike some funding trends, which we have seen, a funder might say, oh, I'll fund that coalition and you're a part of that, so you're benefiting. We will fund both the alliance and that policy capacity, that collective capacity, and we will fund the base building, particular communities, particular issues. All of that work is really vibrant and needed in the city of Boston and Chelsea. So those are some of the quick highlights. As far as this process of internal, for us, the transformation internally, I guess I use this term of capacity building So I would not say to anybody who's at a foundation they've not yet embraced racial justice as an explicit goal. It's not like go off and do a year-long process and you'll come out the back end and have this, wonderful framing. That might happen, but for us, it was really important to build our own capacity, and it was over multiple years process. I can say more about that, but it was things like hearing from other funder colleagues, going to gatherings like this. With the board and staff, we might look at a film of Philip Agnew and the Dream Defenders and just really unpack what does it mean to go radical and go to root causes and things like that. I mean, just multiple engagements and creating that space and that time together to build our own individual capacity to sit in the discomfort and be willing to work with it. So those are a few tidbits about how we've shifted.
Thank you.
So, Lisa.
So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Lisa Owens, and I'm the executive director of a housing justice organization called City Life Vida Urbana. We are a 43-year-old housing justice group. We are Grassroots. We work at the city level and regionally with a network of housing justice organizations, and nationally through our Right to the City National Alliance partners. Really, really proud to be part of the Right to the City National Alliance. So I think it's important to just say a little bit about who we are, because it helps to put in context the impact of the shift that Angela is talking about, that Hyams Foundation made. So to partner more deeply with an organization like City Life has serious political implications, actually. So we work to build power, to build community power and community control of land and housing, and to challenge systems of governance, and really to contest for power at multiple levels. And our work is twofold. We think of it as both defensive and offensive. So reflecting on Ed's really fantastic presentation earlier this morning, our work is both to exploit the cracks in the old economy, which has to do with opposing privatization, in our case specifically around housing, and making demands around regulation, increased regulation of corporations, particularly around real estate finance, and as well, it has to do with creating alternatives, so kind of doing experiments with the new economy. So thinking about things like community land trusts, for example, housing co-ops, right? What are the structures that the new economy will look like? And all of this is situated in communities, developing and making sure that we're led by the communities that are most impacted and have been the site of extraction for as long as anybody can remember. So we're talking about foregrounding the leadership of low-income and middle-income women of color, and communities such as, if you were from Boston, the names Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan, and East Boston would mean something to you. But these are the historical communities of color that jobs fled from, that this investment fled from, and are the sites where our service economy. This is where we work. I mean, this is where we live. Because our approach is both defensive. So specifically, we work with people who are facing eviction, mega rent increases. We're talking 50%, 100%, 200% rent increases. Homeowners who are low income or moderate income, who have predatory loans, who are facing foreclosure. Our job is to develop a grassroots movement to stop global capital in its tracks, and to reclaim our homes and our land, and also to fight for structures that create long-term social ownership. And you can imagine that that puts us in the sights of banks and sort of recipients of global finance, and it makes us very unpopular to some foundations. And so, as a case in point, my first month into being an executive director, our organization lost 2 major sources of funding because of our political stance. And so and Hyams had always been a long-term supporter of our organization, but as Hyams began to make the shift to take the lead of not just communities, individual community organizations, but really the movement that was led by residents, people of color who had our own sort of bases of power, however small, when the communities of color started to organize together across lines of difference that we hadn't been organizing around before, and began to create a movement. Hyams is the one funder that is taking the lead from this community-led movement, and has changed its grant-making structures in response to what we say that we need in order to build power. So that's just really important, I think, to highlight.
My name is Teresa, and I work for the Colorado Trust. And Gwyn and I have a little bit of a different relationship than funder-fundee, in that I have the job title of community partner. And I'll let Gwyn speak more to the institutional changes that brought about the new way that the trust is operating. But I am a community organizer. I've always been. I tell my colleagues that as the oldest of 7 children, I've spent my whole life organizing. And I still organize my family fiercely. And so it represented for me personally a pretty significant shift to move out of really grassroots community organizing to work in partnership with a foundation to do the work that the trust envisions and that we all envision together. And so that shift has really been about being in communities and partnering with communities. The trust basically hired community organizers, or folks who are similar to community organizers, who are embedded in communities throughout the state. So I'm responsible to 10 counties in the southeastern corner of Colorado. And for those of you who aren't aware, the southeastern part of the state, the comparisons between the southeastern part of the state and the Denver metro area, those disparities represent some of the greatest disparities that exist in the country between metro districts and rural districts in a state. And so tremendous, tremendous disparities. And I really resonate with a lot that has been said around recovery, lack of recovery, slow recovery, no recovery, those kinds of pieces. And folks where I live speak fairly freely about this idea of 2 Colorados, that sort of at the end of the El Paso County line where Colorado Springs is, and the Pueblo County line where the southern part of the state starts, there is a second Colorado. And we certainly, I think culturally, very much identify more with northern New Mexico than the northern part of Colorado. We don't have the huge tourist pull that this part of the state has. We don't have the metro district that Denver has. And the agricultural piece has had a lot of ups and downs and is currently fairly depressed in that area. And so to do that work as a community organizer, to enter into that work, first of all, for me, that transition came around the resources that are on the table. And that there are a tremendous amount of resources in the work that we're doing, and that it represents power for communities that haven't been invested in typically over the last 50 years or more. I work in communities where there are no nonprofits that are operating in those communities. And we, I think very wisely, started in smaller communities, but these are also communities that feel the most forgotten. We're not like urban neighborhoods that have been experimented on or where there's been a lot of investment and that pulled back. It really is areas that have never been invested in. And so the hope and the promise that comes from that out of those communities is really overwhelming. And the sense of urgency that comes out of those communities is often very overwhelming. And the negotiation of power, my own power, because I now represent a foundation coming into that community, the negotiation around how do we talk about power in those communities, how do we move from a community understanding equity because they feel like the armpit of their region or the armpit of the state, to really asking that same group of folks to look inwardly within the community and look at where do those equity issues lie within the community. And so that both and the balance between the both and of really engaging in very courageous conversations and in being able to hold where the community is and the continued transformation that the institution of the trust is having to undergo. It's one thing, I believe, for an institution to come to the decision that we're going to take these pretty radical steps forward in how we understand our work and how we do our work. It's another thing to actually live that out. And so the living out of that is really a place often of tremendous tension, but also of great possibility. And so the ways that folks have been invited into relationships that look very different, relationships that have a real investment, a time investment, a resource investment, it's really exciting. It's really hard work, but it's also really exciting work.
Wow. Thanks, Teresa. My name is Gwyn Barley, and I'm the Director of Community Partnerships and Grants at the Colorado Trust. And I came, one of the things I noticed as I've heard people speak is there are really a large number of people in the room that have been at foundations for a short period of time and have come from different backgrounds. And I'm one of those as well. I'm about to enter in January my 5th year at the Trust, or finish my 5th year, I guess. And I came out of a university setting, which is a whole different institutional animal unto its own right. But so I came without a foundation background and entered into a foundation that is a health conversion foundation, result of the sale of a hospital, with an endowment of just a little south of $500 million, and a board that was constructed around a hospital mentality and a sort of a healthcare mentality. So we have doctors that we have to have on the board and different sorts of strange requirements like that. But I was expressly brought in to take the foundation through a pretty dramatic change in the way that we do our work. And there was a CEO that initiated this a year before me, and who was also a physician, interestingly, but who really saw that sort of the way we've always done philanthropy wasn't really meeting the needs of the people of Colorado. And we're about a 30-year-old foundation. And so, we spent a lot of hard time looking at who we are as a foundation and the way we do our work as a foundation. And we really felt that we weren't making a difference in the lives of people, and that if we didn't really radically transform and change our approach to philanthropy, that we were simply rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. And people will hear me say that a lot, that we could rearrange all day long, but the boat was still sinking, and that we really needed to build a different boat. And so as we wrapped up sort of a traditional access to healthcare strategy, we began that transformation. And one of the very first things we did is we started listening to thought leaders around the country, people like Paula Braveman and Adewale Troutman and Doran Schrantz, who rocked my world, and John Powell. We've had just a number of people that really came and talked to us, Tony Eiton. So they came from lots of different sectors and lots of different places, and we turned that into a learning series so that everybody could benefit from that. It seemed a little, foundations can be very exclusive, and with our resources, and we really felt like we needed to have those conversations and those learnings as open as possible. So it's lovingly called HELLS. It's the Health Equity Learning Series. Sometimes it is hellish, but we get through it. And that being said, we did change from access to healthcare to health equity. And we did that, we had a doctor in our CEO position who really thinks in a health disparities mindset. And we really recognized that health disparities was going to be too limiting to what we wanted to do in community as a construct, and that we needed to stand on as big a platform as we could, and that's why we went to health equity. And that would allow communities, residents particularly, to really identify the issues and the priorities and the solutions that were going to work for them. So that also meant that we went through a very dramatic staff change. And I have to say, as a foundation leader, this is really, really hard work. And if you aren't feeling uncomfortable, you're not doing the hard work yet. And so we literally, I was the director of programs, and I effectively let go of all my program officers and started over and rebuilt a new staff of community partners who do not live in Denver. I have one now that lives in Denver, but we never see her because she's out in community all the time, which is where we would hope. But we have 7 community partners now who live around the state, who come from the people of Colorado, who have organizing background. I have to say, in our first round of hiring, we didn't know that we were hiring organizers. They snuck in, and it turned out to be one of the best things that ever happened. The second round, we hired organizers. We sort of figured that out. And that was just the beginning of what has been tremendous change. This was a foundation that gave out grants. It was really easy work to do. The staff, there were very few transactions. Now we make $20, we write $20 checks, we write $50 checks, we write $100 checks, and we weren't built for that. So we really have had to do a lot of retooling internally in terms of how we do our work. We also very intentionally began our own diversity and inclusion work, and really are still on that journey. That's been going on for 2 years. It doesn't end with a certificate of completion. As I always say, I came from a medical school where they love to say everybody's culturally competent. There is no competency in culture. It does not ever happen. It is a continual growth process. And so we all acknowledge that as a staff, and that's every single staff member at the Trust and our board who are involved in that. I also want to call out quickly our other strategy that is our sister strategy, very important to this community partnership work, which is our advocacy strategy. So we were a foundation that had a long history of funding advocacy organizations. Typically, we funded more of the grasstops organizations and not so many of the grassroots. And we very intentionally built a cohort within the field of health equity advocacy of grantees that are quite diverse, come from very different backgrounds, work in very different ways, to really come together as a field to do health equity advocacy together. Our grand hypothesis in this work, it's young like our partnership work is that we will, that those organizations will be better together, working together to advocate for health equity policy change than they will working in their silos or sort of in their coalitions as they might traditionally work. It's sort of similar to our resident work in the sense that they are a community unto themselves. They all have general operating grants to their organizations, and then we gave them all the operating budget of the strategy and said, you all are in control of this, you figure it out. Initially, they really pushed back on us and said, that's not our job. We don't do that, you do that. And we really felt, we really had to hold and say, no, we don't want to make these decisions for you. We don't want to tell you how to do your work. You, like residents, you are the experts in this room. And I have to say, when I first got to the Trust, I would go to these grantee convenings and I'd be like, oh my God, this is so painful. It just felt like, we were making these organizations show up. They'd all come. They'd come because they knew who was paying the bills. And it was this very one-way process. And now they plan all their convenings. They have more than we would have ever imagined having. And they're really rich and dynamic and very powerful. And so eventually these two strategies are going to come together on the road because there's no doubt that communities are going to need things in their thinking around change that are going to be about policy change. And we're really excited about that happening and when that intersection starts to happen. We're young in both of these strategies. where we see ourselves as, so people always say, well, how long are you going to do this work for? And so our board could imagine that we might try this for 10 years. But the other way you'll know you're being successful at a foundation is change, is when you start saying, I can't go back. I can't go back to the way I did it because I changed so much in my organization and I've changed so much in the way that I practice philanthropy. And as a staff now, we will all often say, I can't imagine we could go back to sort of the high control, we make all the decisions model anymore. It just wouldn't happen. So that's where we are. And it is completely resident-driven work. So I'll say two other things. If you've been in one of our communities or one of our places, you've been in one of our communities or one of our places. They are all quite different. They all function on their timeline. We tried. We made all our mistakes. We imposed some timelines on them. Doesn't work. They need to work on their timeline as communities. So again, as a foundation, I have to say I'm very comfortable with however that time flows for different places and different communities. And that's been hard because our board meets quarterly, and we still have these old clunky structures that we're still trying to figure out. And so every once in a while we kind of knock on each other. And I mean, we do that every day probably. Right now. We hit each other every day right now.
It's really great. I love the notion of not being able to unsee. Because when you can't unsee, it changes your whole world,
That's
right? Around, and it also lays the boundary for where are you really going to stand.
Yeah.
And then where people need to stand is where they need to stand, but it's very clarifying for people who want to partner with each other when we can really acknowledge that honestly. Even if we don't know what we're doing in that process. Right? So here's the question. I'm going to skip my boring question, and I'm going to go right to the power question, which is, how are the power dynamics revealing themselves, and what is it requiring of your organization and you personally? And so you spoke a little bit to this, Gwen, around infrastructure as a part of the technical piece of, making this change. But I'm really curious about the adaptive piece, the part that's dynamic, the part that involves human behavior and all those types of things that can be really tricky to negotiate. So again, how are the power dynamics revealing themselves? And what is it requiring of you and your organization? Whoever wants to start. We'll just conversation.
Great. So I'm certainly willing to start. This is very, we're in the midst of this right now. And I actually came here, and last night I think I shared this with Gwyn because I wanted to share it with you all and wanted to make sure she heard it before.
That's the power dynamic.
I thought, I don't want any surprises just in case this doesn't go how I think it will. And so we're working in communities, and we've made some mistakes, and we've been, I think, pretty open with communities around sort of these forced, false timelines that really don't work, and had to sort of pull back and sort of rebuild this kind of culture of relationship within communities. And it's been interesting as we've started, because we're in the middle of this sort of big planning grant and trying to move to some implementation grants for projects and things that folks want to try out in communities and experiment with. And so in the process of doing that, we started talking about power mapping. And when I'm talking about power mapping with the community, I'm thinking they're going to power map their county commissioners, which in a big city would be like your city council. They have that kind of power. County commissioners, state electeds, maybe the school board, maybe a handful of business owners. So that's what I'm thinking of. And the community last Tuesday when we met says, well, we want to power map the trust. We think that that's the most important entity for us to power map. And I didn't know what to say. I wanted to stand up and applaud, and at the same time I was like, what's the trust going to say about this? And so, and I fully expected when I brought this to Gwyn that, that it would be okay, but I didn't know how the conversation would go. I no sooner got it out of my mouth. I think I was with one of my other colleagues, Candace, then Gwyn is like, yeah, I'll come, because I'm saying, I've been there a year and a half. I don't know how to power map the trust, but I'd like to be a part of that. And so Gwyn offers she'll come out and begin to answer questions, but the questions that are coming up for folks, I mean, they're meeting tonight. And our organizers are walking them through GuideStar and how you look stuff up and how you find out the information that you want, starting to collect the kinds of questions that they want to ask so that, Gwyn has a heads up, and they want to know, how is the money invested? What else do you fund? How does a foundation work? Because I'm working in communities where folks didn't really even know what a foundation was. They thought, at one point, they thought we were like a for-profit education center. And so there's, all of these pieces around the communities sort of grabbing onto what does all of this mean for us, and really wanting to call it what it is and to put it on the table and to be clear about who are we working with. You know so much about us, but we don't know very much about you. And so we need to know that, and we want to know who the board is. We want to know how that came into being. We want to know, what this looks like in the scope of foundations.
Who's our partner?
Yeah, in the state. Who does the trust partner with? So if the trust is walking us through this process of really bringing our community together, there's no way that the trust has the resources to really help us realize our dreams for our community. So who else are you going to put us into contact with? Who else are you going to leverage your relationships with for us? And so I'm super excited that communities are asking those level of questions and want to know that level of information. I'm a little afraid of what that really is going to look like, if I'm really honest, because I don't know the answers to a lot of those questions. What will I think about that? And I'm super excited that we have a team of people who are willing to walk right into those conversations, to have those and to own those.
Yeah, I guess I would add that, you have to figure out how to say yes to everything. You really do. I mean, I think that I have to, and that's uncomfortable at times, but that's what I have to do, is I have to keep saying, how do I say yes to this? Or how do I figure out how we do this, but also how do I not break the law? And that's a constant, I am in that space every day. Yeah. And if you're not in that space, you're not pushing the envelope hard enough, because that's where you have to go, because it's those, when you're working in migrant communities or when you're working in communities where there are undocumented folks, if you're not pushing those envelopes, you're not changing the system. And so if you gotta feel really uncomfortable, it gets uncomfortable.
I love that this notion of meaning making and sort of, well, what does it mean to say yes to everything? Because when you ask that question, then you have to look at your policies and procedures.
Yes.
You have to look at who are we hiring. You have to look at how are our values actually being lived in the practices that we have as a foundation and as people out in the field. And thank you so much for talking about the fear of that, because sometimes we don't know the answer, right? Mm-hmm. And so what do we do in that moment? And do we move forward?
And I want to say one other thing. The staff that are on the front line of this work it's a really hard job, because they are standing in the face of community all the time and navigating the relationships and having to sometimes say the trust screwed up and I got to cover, So and there were certainly conversations early on where this staff, clearly, they probably still do feel a bit vulnerable, like at any moment we're going to just push them off a cliff, which foundations are famous for doing. So it's going to take us a long time to build that long-term relationship and confirm through our actions that we're committed to this work and that we're not going to go, oh, so sorry, we got bored and we changed our mind.
Well, and to understand that we're not out there in institutional relationships with community.
Right.
We're there with our personal relationships,
right.
Our personal reputations. These are the places where we live. These are the places for me. These are the places where my family's been for 6, 7, 8 generations. And so, it is about trusting the institution enough to say, I'm going to invite you into these very personal relationships that I've made with this community, and I want us to manage those relationships and be good to those relationships together.
Angela?
Hey. Yeah, so I have a slightly different type of example, but before talking about my example, I want to just lift up that for the Hyams Foundation. I mean, I am really, really clear that for us to be in a position to be talking about dismantling the school to prison pipeline,
Yeah.
advancing equitable housing access through land use and institutional policy change that slow down the rampant, predatory capital in our communities, or advancing fair wages, employment, and working conditions, just like safety, all these things, that it's only because of the brilliance of community organizers, leaders, the collective sort of hope and being fired up and ready to lift up some of these issues. So I'm very aware that it comes with that kind of responsibility. So in one of the areas that we do fund in is thinking about policies or institutional practices that would address low-income youth of color, youth who are not being served well and being pushed out and funnel into the school-to-prison pipeline as it's being described. And we were very fortunate to have a number of youth-led organizing groups taking on the zero tolerance policies. I don't know if people have heard about that. This, acting up or, very discrete behaviors, and you're out, you're suspended, you're expelled, these types of things. So we have been, pretty much in that space for some time. Newer for us is thinking about, unfortunately, young people in Massachusetts with our policies is not exactly where they need to be, still getting swept into juvenile justice incarceration and huge racial disparities in the state of Massachusetts, unfortunately. So we were in discussion with with looking at an actual grant proposal, thinking about with these young folks and their adult allies. They're both, they're pretty involved and have already been researching ideas around pre-arraignment diversion and ideas around juvenile records expungement. Same deal, you've been involved, incarcerated, or affiliated with juvenile justice X amount of time, your term is done. Should you really have this record following you around with your post-secondary ed, your jobs, all this stuff affected by it? So looking at these two, and of course, I with my little bit like, ooh, can we get upstream? Get a look at young people before they get involved. And this particular group said, no, we've had a process. We've gone to our peers. We've had deep conversation. We want to take on the expungement, the records expungement. So it was out of community wisdom. This came out as this is the priority. This is the campaign we're mounting. We're filing the legislation. We'll go to Senate Judiciary, all this stuff. And in the end, very persuasive and strategic around, we have these contacts and this relationship, the social capital, whatever you want to call it, with our peers. There's so many young people that have been affected who have these records and are totally fired up and been pushed to the wall. And we, in the end, trusted that community wisdom and said, this is what the grant will go to. Again, not always easy. It's not just like, you like to kind of do the thing that on the numbers or on the basis of, prevention, you might want to gravitate to that, but it has to come from community wisdom. So that's my one small example.
Thanks.
Yeah, so I'll just touch on the land use policy, the land use grant making area. So during the process of Hyams' strategic plan, there were grantees like City Life and many other housing justice activists were a part of this process. And there came a point, it was kind of early on in the process, but not at the beginning. So there was a little bit of anxiety around some of our groups that the foundation was about to make unintentionally a political stand that wouldn't support the movement building organizations. So Boston is in the top 3 in terms of cities in the country around income inequality, around just the rapid rate of displacement. And there have been studies that show that if we don't do something very, very soon, whole neighborhoods of low-income people will be completely transformed within a matter of years. So we're in an urgent crisis around displacement. And because we're talking about power, we're talking about sides. We're talking about, we're in a battle for our city. And so our groups have been really foregrounding the issue of displacement, and the city has been really talking about the issue of housing creation, right? And so thinking of this as a supply-demand issue, and so this is a political issue. And our groups have, at that moment, had done a really good job of raising the issue of displacement as an issue, actually. But there was a lot of work to be done at this in terms of moving key leaders at the city level. So when Hyams was talking about land use and didn't highlight the issue of displacement, in effect, it would have been a political stance. And I remember having lots of conversation with the staff person of Hyams, who is our program officer. And I should say that we have, because of the partnering and learning stance that the foundation has, we have a very open relationship. We learn together. She's often at community meetings or rallies, so we were able to have a pretty open dialogue about the thinking that had led to Hyams to come to this point. And this was not an easy conversation, but I would say, to its credit, Hyams realized that it was about to make a political stance, and decided, because racial and economic power, equity and the power building was in essence a key part of why it exists, that it would take a stand on behalf of the movement building organizations. So yeah, I think we're incredibly excited about that, and that ultimately led to the decision to fund the coalition that is led by the movement building groups of color in the city.
Did you know that you were about to make a political stand?
I mean, I think yes, and I think that Lisa's alluding to the power of communications too, to really take the time to unpack some of our jargon and what do we really mean. And it was a teachable moment for us because, we are interested in moving the edgier, social racial justice kinds of levers forward. We talk a lot with groups around, fighting every year for that summer youth jobs employment budget line. It's the same fight. What's durable change look like? So we have those conversations. But Elisa's referring to also this production mentality of housing. Is that going to solve the problem? And we had to really message that in a more distinct way, that it's affordability first. And we're still working. This is early. We're just 1 year in. So the wording and the framing is likely to change as we evolve and iterate. We like to be a learning organization. So yeah, it's absolutely right.
Yeah, I asked that question because when we were preparing to come on stage, I was talking about how these questions can be answered by anybody, and sort of what does it really require, of an organization and the community who's a grantee. And I mean, I don't even think of it like that. I think you guys are peer partners, and to be able to have that conversation, and you having the authority that that you have, and the relationship that you have with the community, with the organization, allows you to do that. But there are so many nonprofits and organizations out there who haven't quite figured that out yet, or have taken that risk and then been, really batted down for that. And so the openness of the foundation to be able to receive a learning moment from a partner in the community seems really critical to me. And again, I think all of the relationship building that you have done over time lends itself to that. And so for folks, I'm just thinking about folks out in the audience who may want to be there too, and it's so evident you just don't get there. Right?
It's intentional.
Yeah,
it's intentional. And I would say, some of the things are very common sense kinds of things. I don't think there's anything, so mysterious as the process, but the intention is key. The organization culture, our culture had really evolved to the point to really allow more of that risk-taking, I think, is kind of what I'm hearing from the example that you're talking about. So that's a basis of support, but even that takes time to build out. It's not just something that happens overnight. It takes attention. Yeah.
Gwen, did you want to add to that?
No, that's exactly right. You must find yourself in a state of chronic and constant learning. And if you're not, you're on the wrong track. Get back on the learning track.
So here's a question that came up in the planning process for the whole conference, and that is, what does it require of you individually to be in a constant place of learning? And so a lot of the questions that we're asking, I'm newer to philanthropy, so I'm thinking, well, what does it really take to do that, to hold that space in your foundation and to hold that space in relationship with people in the community? So I want to dig a little deeper and ask folks to maybe share some vulnerability like folks did yesterday around just you personally in this position of power. And I see everyone in this place as a position of power.
Yep.
And so if you could just talk a little bit about how you think about that, what that means for you, how does it inform, when do you find yourself going to the question of what does it mean?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll just take a pass at the first part, which is I do think that spaces such as this, it's organizing funders, right? It's creating some collective spaces and field partners, right? How to do more of that. It means a lot, I think, to have fellow travelers and to sort of be able to amplify some of the stories of, there are other examples like very similar to Hyams, many. So it's emergent, we need more, but it's gonna happen. I think we're seeing positive signs. One small story, I think midway through our strategic plan process, I remember being in a meeting with our board and staff and talking about really some of these dramatic changes, because the picture that I painted earlier really did affect about 45% of our grant making actually has really shifted quite a lot. And trying to do that responsibly and all that. But I remember being in this one particular conversation that was a facilitated space, which was very helpful. And the activity was how to embrace change and talk to your partner, do a pair activity, your table activity, about something in your life when you embrace change, whether intentional change, forced upon you change, what skills, what attributes, what strategies did you bring, and just telling personal stories of my own story of as a child in a family where we were evicted. And just having to hustle and find new housing or something and that and be in a new place. And that's resilience, or that's change, and that's a positive thing, or something like that. And applying that to the work going forward. So I just feel like there's a lot of tools out there, and there's a lot of possibility, and showing up is a big part of the equation.
Mm-hmm. I guess I would say, as an executive director, that I do a lot of program-related work, and probably lots of grassroots organizations, executive directors are playing that role. So I am with our community leaders as much or more time actually than I am spending doing things like this and educating funders and talking to other stakeholders of the city, et cetera. And so for me, it's important to stay grounded in the reason why I'm here. I'm here to be a voice for the folks who give me my marching orders. And this may sound strange, but at any moment, I have to be able to be to represent them in a way that they would feel proud of me. And that means I have to be willing to risk my funding at any opportunity. Because if I say what they expect me to say, then I very well could piss off the wrong person, and I will lose yet another grant that our organization desperately relies on for survival. And so I have to weigh that lots of us are bicultural. I have to weigh that, and in the final analysis, I have to be the best spokesperson for our movement, our people, because that's what they're entrusting me to do. And so that requires a really high level of risk, and it also requires one to be a little schizophrenic. But
In
yeah.
a good way.
In every way possible, actually. But yeah, mostly in a good way.
We're going to connect this all to resiliency in a minute, but
Yeah.
So I think certainly working beyond one's own fear, for me working beyond my own fear around this work, really normalizing the instances in communities when there is very significant pushback or pushback that I didn't expect. Really normalizing that in a way that I'm not sending the message that it's not okay to question around this particular area or in this particular way. Even when it's really uncomfortable for me is really huge. And I think it really, for me, goes back to, early on in this work, the sort of the original 4 community partners who had a lot of conversations about wanting to ensure that communities weren't the only ones taking a risk, or that those risks were not so totally imbalanced that we weren't also ourselves taking risk, and particularly within the institution and in pushing the trust to continue to meet communities where they are. Gwyn alluded to the diversity and inclusion work that we're doing, which really is, I think, moving out of diversity and inclusion and into anti-oppression work. But it'll be a while before the trust can call it that, I think. But it really is. I mean, in terms of the work that is being done at a staff level and interpersonally between staff, it really is. And the relationship between staff and the institution, it really is about anti-oppression work. And then how that translates to communities. And so getting past the fear of how uncomfortable that makes me as a person of color in that environment is really critical, and bringing community into those spaces with me. And so knowing that when I'm in those spaces, it isn't just me that has something at stake. It's all of the communities I'm working with who have something at stake. And so because of that, I must challenge and I must say things that are uncomfortable.
So this was about, this question, as I've been listening to it, is really about our personal experience. Yeah. So obviously, I'm white, and certainly, I, from a very young age, I'm rewarded in our culture and in our society to be unconscious, and to take all my unearned privilege, because I've earned it, whether I have or not. And I think for me, really the personal journey of focusing the lenses through which I have been, there have been times when I feel like I'm very blurred, and I'm trying to understand and appreciate the perspective of people that have had very different lived experiences than myself, and then also to stand in the work very, very consciously and very aware of the privilege that I get every single day in this society. I mean, sitting here in Aspen is extremely comfortable for me, and I know it's not extremely comfortable for a lot of the people in this room. And honestly, Aspen is the strangest place in Colorado, so it's even a bit uncomfortable for me. So I really think I've had to, and I do get, I also get personal one-on-one coaching from an amazing woman out in Oakland who works with me, and I can talk through issues and talk through in a very safe space, which I don't think people get very often. And it's one of the wonderful gifts of being in philanthropy, where there's a lot of resources and a lot of wealth to be able to embark on my own journey and to work through some of the long-standing issues that I have that inform the work. I mean, there's just a lot of things that I have to deconstruct and unravel and be challenged on and think differently about and become a different person. And that's the best part of this work. I just love that. I understand and appreciate things in such a different way. I just have to quickly say, I think for me, and Teresa's going to laugh at me, but we did this great fishbowl exercise where we put the white people on the outside and we put the people of color, the black and brown people on the inside of the circle, and just talked about what's important in the being of each other. And the people of color stressed relationship. And I was like, and we had this really quick conversation where people said, how often do you talk to your mom? And I was like, I don't know, once a week, maybe? And I mean, the people of color were like, what? I talk to my mom 3 times a day, every day. There's this really different, for me, the takeaway of that exercise was just the profound difference in the lived experiences of people. And that I take for granted that my experience is everybody else's experience. And that's just really naive and really immature. And I have found that the work in anti-oppression, in facing race, has been really, really powerful. And the way that I know that it's working is I can't go to the traditional funder meetings anymore. They drive me crazy. I feel dirty. And so we go to things like Policy Link and to Undoing Racism and to Race Forward. We had someone on our staff go to a white privilege conference. I mean, and these are meetings where there are no funders in the room. And it's really, really important to go into those spaces and to hear a very different discourse and a very different conversation from very different people than who we usually talk to. And when I go to a GIH or a GEO, I'm like, I'm just talking to the same old people. I'm not being challenged in my thinking. I'm actually being encouraged to join in and to be part of the group and to circle those wagons tighter and to hold philanthropy. And I can't do that anymore. I just can't do that. So.
Well, this is a good segue into our questions that we have about 30 minutes left. And while we transition into that, I was wondering, did everyone else see in this room about the sort of the aliveness that shows on all of your faces when you're talking from your heart about what's important to you? And also the realness around, yeah, sometimes it's not easy. And just think about how many chances we get to do that on a regular basis, to be real with each other. And why do we need to wait for like these spaces for that? How do we do that every day with our colleagues, with ourselves, for goodness sakes, and be honest? So we're going to move into some reflection. And what I'd like folks to do, because we know we have a lot of different learning styles in the room, is I want to offer about just a short time. I wish it could be more, but about 3 minutes for folks to just jot down what's on your mind as a result of this conversation. What are you thinking? What's standing out to you that's important for you to take away? And then we're going to get into some questions, but I want to give folks a chance to do that first. Okay? Thanks. I'll let you know in 3 minutes.
A way to look out for the introverts.
That's right. shoes are wearing your moccasins. They're dancing? Nice.
So if I had my, if I were at home and in the office and we were doing something like this, I have these bells that I use to sort of bring to everyone's attention. So I'm just going to pretend that I have them. Ding, 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 ding. And let's just, we have microphones, I think, out in the audience. So if you have a question, if you could just raise your hand and the magic mic will appear. Yep.
Thank you so much for your comments. And I think that you all alluded to this a little bit, but could you talk specifically about the strategies you use to get buy-in and move your board of directors in your respective foundations in particular?
Do you want me to start? Okay. So our board is a governance board, which is extremely helpful. And when they want to cross that line, our CEO sends them hustling back to the other side very quickly. And it really is, it's as much a developmental learning process for them as it is for everyone else. And I think, and through having, like Doug Easterling, who's here, came and visited our board and talked about the importance of doing work in community. So, it's not a hard case to make. At the end of the day, when you're talking about people's lives and you're talking about trying to make a difference and you're saying, wow, what we've done the last 30 years, I can't hold a lot up from that. So, we can engage the definition of insanity and keep doing the same thing, or we can suggest that maybe we need to think very radically and differently about things. And we're in a society right now, and we're in a cultural milieu where this is happening all around us. And there is not a single board member that can say, I'm not aware of any race issues going on right now.
Right.
They are aware of them too, and you can name those. So you just have to stay in the conversation with them. And there are times when it's 2 steps forward, a step back, they freak out, and you have to kind of ride that with them.
I think another thing that's helpful, and remember I'm new, is we spend time with our board. The community partners are in the room with board members, and if we're not in the room with board members, we're on the call for parts of their meetings to be able to give updates and to deliver sort of messages directly from the community, and really, most importantly, to tell stories about the work that we're doing, and I think that makes a difference.
Yeah, like our board just met over on the Western Slope in Montrose, and we went up to one of the communities and just walked around the community. And again, there's always different reactions to that, but you just manage that.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the stories are really, really important, and we've been fortunate because we're a place-based funder in a fairly compact yet populous area, that it makes it a little bit easier to, we go out frequently to have our board meetings in the community or take on a learning topic, constant learning. So those, even direct relationship, Lisa's been to the board, I don't know how many times, or, city life has definitely, informed our lens around housing issues. So just a lot at the board level, and then having that space that it just says, what are the uncomfortable questions, that we need to follow up on. And it's the same, it's a policy board. We try not to do a lot of very granular grant making. The decision is at our board, but it's done sort of as a whole, and they set the policy and things like that. So we use our time really focusing on those important learning questions. I jumped over this part of the story early on before we had explicitly adopted a racial justice mission statement, we began by applying this lens in one of our giving areas and had collaborated with the Center for Social Inclusion. Shout out to CSI in just, again, iterating and learning and kind of pushing into the discomfort. And our board was a big part of that, actually. And so that got them really right in the mix.
Great. Other questions?
Yes.
What came out was something that I was sharing last night that someone said, you have to write this down. I was like, okay. But something that came out was that
I wanted to write down.
I feel like when I'm doing this work, I get a lot of, I'm in a lot of institutional spaces where the leadership is very white, and there's a lot of conversation about white ally. And something that this conversation brought out for me is that it's been really transformative with some of these relationships that I've had to lay out an expectation that it's not just about white ally, but white accomplice and what that means. And that's what it sounds like. When I look at it, white accomplice, like the few that I feel like I have, that in my eyes have earned that position, call me. And they tell me, like, oh my gosh, you need to be aware of this thing, and you need to know this person, and this is what was just said. And it's not me calling them and saying, hey, can you help me figure out how to say this, or can you be the one to bring up white privilege, right? And that's just something for me that this really kind of came out as well, is the need to be very clear with our white allies that's great, and now we need you to be white accomplices, and this is what it means for me. And you can choose to make that choice or not. And I find that with white allies and white accomplices now, I've always gotten back that, like, oh my gosh, now that's clear. Thank you so much for being clear with what you want from me. Because that's all I've been trying to figure out is, what do you want? How can I help? So it was just something that came out for me, and I feel I really heard loud and clear from you and what I've seen in my own experience. I just wanted to offer that up.
Could you share a little bit about what your role is? Because I think that also puts a different light on your comments. And since I know you.
Beyond white ally. Which people in the work.
So my role as Vitalyst? Got it. So I'm recruited to Vitalyst Health Foundation's board. And it's been something that Raquel and I have been talking about for quite some time. And part of it is about bringing in kind of that lived experience to what has been very institutionalized, and to diversify that conversation. And so I feel very, very clear that is what my role is. And oftentimes that means being the agitator in the room to shake up the status quo mentality. And so that's in large part what I feel my role is at Vitalyst Health Foundation.
Great, thank you.
So really connected to how important it is to have an awareness of white supremacy and racism. What I appreciate about the work that Hyams has been doing is not just that there are that the staff are staff of color at this foundation, and the board is actually predominantly folks of color, but it's actually more than just the color of your skin. It actually is an entire analysis that understands the intersections and the interconnections of these systems of oppression, and not just sort of, because there are lots of folks in Boston particularly who can talk about the analysis at a theoretical level, but when it comes time to put that analysis in practice, then what you see is actually, reinscribing those same systems of oppression and power. And so the proof is in the pudding, right? Like so what? So you can articulate, these analyses, you know that you can't talk about class without talking about race. And so therefore that means that you're going to fund communities of color that are led by people who are working class people who are right now, facing all of these issues that we're, trying to dismantle. So, right, so it's like the so what.
thank you for both of you for those comments, because actually this is a live question that I'm wrestling with, that our foundation is wrestling with. Is this related to so what? It's also what does success look like? And we know that this is not a linear process. Social, racial justice is not going to be this linear. It's going to, I think one of our board members uses this metaphor of creeping and then leaping. You know, just imagine you're a small animal along creeping and then leaping. Anyway, the movement does need to have that space. And so understanding the example that you just gave me this idea of a wonderful kind of, I know our work will be having an impact when some of the folks perhaps in positional power, positions of positional power, sorry, there's another way of saying that, are beginning to self-describe in exactly the way you've said. That would be slam dunk, like we're making inroads or something like that. Just a different kind of, we've been talking a lot about qualitative, and it's not just numbers and things like that.
One thing that I think is I've seen be very powerful in terms of Joseph's role is when somebody says, I am an ally, and they do not exercise themselves as one, he has something to go to them to and say, now come on. You know, you said you wanted to be there at the table with us, and this is what this would look like. And that didn't look like that. And so really calling people to step into what they say they want to step into, and holding them accountable for that. And that's both community folks and also people within our foundation, for sure. Did you guys want to say anything about that? No? Other questions?
It's like the fatigue of lunch.
Larry.
Thank you so much. I've been so inspired and appreciative and grateful that I get to work with you all on a regular basis. So I guess my question is, what was the scariest moment and the moment you had to be really brave? And I'll say, I think about that because Raquel, when we work together, you know, we both feel challenged by the term safe spaces, right? And Raquel challenges us to work in brave spaces, right? So not to say what's safe and comfortable as long as no one tells that we said it, or like, you know what I mean? But to actually say what's brave, where do we have to stretch ourselves? Where do we have to be honest in a different way? So one, thank you for that framework. But it always also leads me to the question, what was scary? When did you have to be brave? And how did it go?
Well, I'll kick us off. I mean, I don't want to overstate that, for example, our board and staff have this very uniform lens on this work. I'm not saying exactly right. I guess one of the things is just this recognition of the scale and the depth of the issues. And so for some of us, on different days of the week, perhaps, it's this thing of, are we up to it? You know, that whole, just what we all go through, you know, just finding the hope in the unseen and the making the path and walking, all those metaphors. So that sometimes it comes out in we're a mid-sized funder, we don't have the funding level to work at this level. We're about 140 million in assets. So, you know, and we're up against huge capital flows, if you will, just on housing alone, coming into the city of Boston. So that type of thing has come up as an example.
So I'll give an example. This is another part of the strategic planning process. So there are multiple convenings of grantees, and largely so that the foundation can learn and hear from what's happening, but also so that we can sort of coordinate across sector, and particularly so various campaigns can support each other along our various timelines and trajectories. And so there was one portion where the foundation was asking the coalitions what we needed in terms of capacity. And Angela and I are in this conversation right now. So, so it's a risky thing when your funder is asking you, what can't you do well?
Yeah.
And so there's this push and pull to be both honest and ask for and actually get what you need, and also to not look like you don't know what you're doing, and therefore perhaps they'll stop funding you. And so there was a moment where members of a coalition that we sit on was, there was a member who's sort of newer to this foundation space, who kind of bared it all, and other folks in the coalition are like just texting each other wildly, saying, what are we going to do? And it was a moment for us. It was a moment. And because it's Hyams, we know that we know that nothing bad is going to happen. And had it been another funder, it's not quite clear what would have happened after that. So I guess that so that's one snapshot of many instances like this where we walk the line between saying what we actually need and also needing to play the game.
I think for me, I'm still in sort of the space of needing to be brave and courageous around recognizing the power that I hold as part of a foundation. Particularly, each of and there's a lot of my colleagues who are community partners who are also in the room, and we've built these teams of folks in communities and in the regions where we work, folks who are mainly contract workers or doing very part-time work, doing other kinds of things, but are very valuable members of the team. And the dynamic of recognizing that I because I'm an employee of the trust, I enjoy a whole lot of benefits of being an employee of the trust and being taken care of by the trust that those folks don't enjoy. And so really being able to talk openly about that with those colleagues, and inviting sort of pushback on myself around places where I make the power plays or am doing things that my own integrity would not want me to be doing, but then also being really open and able to sort of sit even in my defensiveness when those challenges are made. And so really being able to have those honest conversations, not just in communities and with communities as a woman of color, but what does it mean for me to sit in this position of power among other folks where that power differential is different and where I have more power, and how to move beyond the fear of having those hard conversations.
Yeah, I think I probably have a moment of fear every day, just because the work is unfolding and there are things that are pushing my boundaries and pushing my limits. And I think I'm sort of used to that, and it's then how I react to that that's probably more important than the fear itself. And sometimes I don't do that very well. I react and sort of want to go into my find it, fix it mode, or just say no, or so I think I probably spend more time in the space of trying to breathe. I've taken up meditation, which has been helpful to take a few breaths at times and to let things really unfold more. And that every fear is really conquerable. There's nothing in this work that we can't overcome with the team that we have and the great minds that we have and the people that we're working with in community. I mean, they're just absolutely brilliant people. And it's my job is to try to get out of their way and not be afraid of it. So when I feel fear, that's sending me a message that I need to step back, I need to think about it a little bit. And I do that most of the time, but I definitely have my days when I don't.
Great. Yes.
I think maybe Gwyn, you said this something earlier about wanting to try to say yes to everything. Mm-hmm. So tend to think about abundance, but I also find in my day, there's only so many hours, and in my programmatic budget, I also have only so many program dollars, right? So I'm curious, how does one say yes to everything while also still kind of maintaining my own sanity as an individual, and also knowing that I'm trying to manage to a particular budget target that I'm also restrained by?
I think in terms of budget, we're definitely, so the budget question's a really interesting one because this work started in, it's been growing. It starts very, very small and it starts to grow. And we do pay all of the residents, we pay everybody that participates in this work. So, we talked very early on about we didn't want to be the only people in the room when somebody said, so who's getting paid here? And the 3 foundation people raised their hands and no one else did. We thought that's not okay. These people are bringing real intellectual gifts and prowess and ideas, and they deserve to be paid as much as I do. And I think that the bulk of our budget goes toward this work, and we're still growing into that budget. So it's a great question. And a lot of the things that I'm getting to yes on don't necessarily have a money implication to them either. It may be a style or an approach or power mapping. Power mapping is not, it's expensive if it means, there's not an expense to that, but there's real, so you're always in a cost-benefit analysis too of saying, how is this gonna really help support this community and move their work forward? I'm really looking forward to, as we move into real implementation of, into the solution in space, to see what sorts of things they come up with. And again, these communities are already leveraging such little amounts of money and saying, oh, we talked to CDOT and they're gonna replace our sidewalks for us, or we did this, and that is happening completely on their own, with the exception that we gave them a venue to organize in. And so that's not where I'm struggling. I'm struggling in the milieu of being in a foundation that still has a lot of traditional identity to it.
As an individual.
For me as an individual? Well, I worked in a university. I worked in a medical school for so many years where nobody had any time boundaries whatsoever. And when I got to the foundation, actually someone sat me down and said, we don't email after 5 o'clock. And I was like, you don't? What do you do after 5 o'clock? So actually, my life has actually improved. Now, we do travel a lot more, and I really enjoy that. Again, I'm like, the whole world is remote, and technology gives you so much power to control your time, and you can turn it off or you can keep it on. I am guilty as charged. I do email after 5 o'clock now. A lot of the times the partners are working at night. I think for me, the big thing I have to say that I'm really, really committed to with the partners is that they work for life balance, because they could work 120 hours a week. Without even a blink, and much less of an issue for me in Denver than it is for them, where every meeting is in the evening. They're being called all the time. I mean, they've really got. I think you guys really have to work hard to manage that, and I can't manage that for them. But I do say to them, like, don't tell me that you're taking the morning off when you were just at a meeting the night before. I don't need to know that.
Great.
I think I commented on the budget part earlier in terms of the fear question. Although one thing I would say is any 1 year's grant budget is just that 1 year's grant budget, and maybe there's creative ways to leverage, to your point, to build leverage, to think about ramping up that footprint. But I think the time one is well put, and it may be, I think for me, when I see the time contradictions coming out, it's a product of, have we been really clear about our lens, our frame, how we're showing up, our identity statement, whatever words you want to use, to try to have that be a shared understanding and be pretty clear. It's going to evolve, but to be pretty clear that you're not trying to be all things to all people, that statement goes, but really trying to respond, but with a frame and with a set of values. That will help, I think.
So I just want to ask folks to join me in a round of applause for these folks. lived wisdom comes in a lot of different forms, and we have it all here right now. I mean, we're all in this game and playing it and have something to offer. I wanted to just mention one thing about sort of the transformation of philanthropy. I really feel like that conversation started last night in the plenary, and I just want to invite folks for the rest of the time that they're here at the gathering to really think about this as not change, but as transformation, and about what is the new that is being created, not because we want it to be new, but because everything around us is insisting that we try something different, and that we collectively join in that conversation. And that means by testing how vulnerable we are with funders, to how vulnerable we are with the people we see in the community at the grocery store, and knowing our roles around that. So I'd be curious to loop back with folks around transformation and how you're contributing to that mindfully.